Josh Hasten here, Israel Uncensored, on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com, and we are talking elections 2019. Hope you're doing well in your part of the world. In just a few minutes, we'll be speaking to Dan Diker, Research Fellow at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, a great friend of the show, getting his take on these elections. And in just a few hours, we will know the exit poll results indicating which party will be the largest party, whether it's Likud, the Prime Minister's party, Prime Minister Netanyahu, or Benny Gantz's blue and white. And there's still a long way to go in terms of actually forming a government and building a coalition. We'll talk to Dan a little bit more about that later on. But want to get to some news here also related to the elections. The Prime Minister leading up to his next, I believe this is either his fourth or his fifth election, seeking the premiership here in Israel. Reported by the Jerusalem Post, the Prime Minister has gone on the offensive in terms of policies in regard to building in Judea and Samaria. Our good friend Gil Hoffman reported the other day that over the weekend, the goal of the campaign switched to Likud taking seats from the so-called parties on the right, trying to win more seats than the blue and white party by saying that he would annex communities in Judea and Samaria. That was the biggest story over the last couple of days, I would say, out of the Likud at least, from the Prime Minister leading up to the election, Netanyahu vowing to annex communities in Judea and Samaria. The Prime Minister speaking to Arutz Sheva, saying that this announcement, that these policies have nothing to do with the election. They are the continuation of a trend he has been promoting for several months. He also said, when asked if he's committed to the establishment of a Palestinian state, he said, quote, "There will be no Palestinian state, not as people talk about it. It will not be because I am making sure of it. I am not uprooting settlements, rather applying sovereignty to them. I am maintaining a united Jerusalem. I'm maintaining our control on the entire area west of the Jordan River to prevent another Gaza. This is my policy. I told that to the Americans. President Trump, Obama, Vice President Biden told me that this is not a state. I told him to call it whatever you want. He said it was not sovereignty. I said, that's what I'm willing to do. That's all." So the Prime Minister talking tough in terms of the future of Judea and Samaria, for the first time, as far as I know, publicly saying that he was interested in applying sovereignty to the Jewish areas, at least, of Judea and Samaria. So will this, in fact, happen? Will this be the policy if the Prime Minister wins the election? I don't know, but I definitely know that his goal was, in fact, to garner more support from those who are perhaps voting for a smaller party on the right, stressing that he believed the Likud needed to win the election outright, meaning finish with more seats than the blue and white, because he was not confident that he could build or trust some of the potential partners in building a governing coalition. So his goal in the last couple of days, originally, he said, if you remember a couple of months ago and leading up to the election, he tried to encourage the right parties, the parties on the right, to join forces so that votes wouldn't be lost. Well, now he's mixing it up. Even if some of those parties do not pass the electoral threshold, he's not convinced, according to what he says, that the president, Ruby Rivlin, will pick him first to try to form a governing coalition. Therefore, he says Likud needs to be the largest party. That is the strategy. Again, the J-Post also reporting that the PM says that the U.S. knows about his annexation plan. So that is also something we're going to look forward. We're going to look to talk about in the days leading up to a potential announcement by the Trump administration of the so-called deal of the century. How will that impact it? What will the plan say? And how will Netanyahu's claim that he is for sovereignty in Judea and Samaria have an impact on whatever the Trump plan does or does not say? At the same time, the J-Post also reports that on the eve of Israeli elections, construction on 4,650 new homes in communities in Judea and Samaria have been approved. Also, something brand new. The bottom line is that this is the highest number of approvals at one time since President Trump took office. And we've been asking now for over 2 years, why isn't the government of Israel building now that there is a great friend in the White House? It appears here, as we are having our elections for the 21st Knesset, that many apartments, houses, homes in the communities throughout Judea and Samaria have been approved, 4,615 new houses. So let's see if that in fact happens, if the Prime Minister wins the election. Because we've heard about promises of building before which have not happened. We've heard about promises of future building. But here we have the largest approval since President Trump took over, and we'll have to just see. We'll have to see if it in fact happens, or is this just election talk and promises which, as we know, many politicians make, trying to get as many votes as they can. Turning now to Hamas in Gaza, we actually have to thank Hamas. I mean, God forbid, they're obviously an evil terror organization, but I've said it many, many times before, at least that they say what's on their mind and they tell the truth, unlike Fatah, Mahmoud Abbas's lying party, which is also a terror organization, the Palestinian Authority. But Hamas says, in the next war between Hamas and Israel, the Israelis will have to evacuate not only their, get this, settlements near the border with the Gaza Strip, but also Ashdod, Ashkelon, the Negev, and Tel Aviv. Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas in Gaza, threatened just the other day. Notice how he did not say settlements and talk about Bet El, Shiloh, Eli, on and on and on. He mentioned the settlements of the Gaza border communities. In other words, Hamas is admitting that they view Sderot and Netivot and Ofakim and all those communities down on the Gaza border as illegal settlements. So anybody who says that the issue is Israelis building in Judea and Samaria, why don't you just listen to the enemies of Israel who are saying what they mean when they're talking about settlements? It's nothing new, but it's actually, I appreciate the fact that they're admitting, but I just hope that the Israelis are listening, because that is what they mean when they say settlements, whether it's Akko, whether it's Jaffa, or Ashkelon, Ashdod, it doesn't matter. It's not about communities in Judea and Samaria. Settlements are Sderot. And I've talked about this before during the last military operation when Hamas was talking about raining rockets down on the settlement of Sderot. This is what they say, and this is what they believe. They want the whole country, as is the Palestinian Authority, the PLO. They want the whole country. They just pretend that they are interested in peace. They're just terrorists in suits. That's the difference between the two, but I wish people would listen. Just a couple more items here before we get to Dan Diker. At the Republican Jewish Coalition meeting in Las Vegas, I had the privilege of being there 2 years ago with the RJC. But you had the President of the United States, President Trump, speak, and then you had about 10 members of the If Not Now organization. That's basically their whole organization, by the way. Every time you see them, there's always 10 of them. Wherever it is, there's always 10 of them, and I would recognize some of the faces here, but they protested the president's speech. They caused a ruckus. This so-called liberal or left organization, of course, the left believes in freedom of speech, yet they interrupted the president during his speech, trying not to let him to speak. And here you have an image of one of those protesters with a crossed-out swastika on her shirt, basically indicating that she believes that Israel is on the same level as the Nazis. That's essentially what she is saying here. So 10 of these clowns interrupt the president. No harm done. But again, just the same 10 people over and over who until now have never even said that they support the Jewish state of Israel. So they're certainly not a pro-Israel organization. And they're not even pretending to be a pro-Israel organization. They're just anti everything that has to do with the state of Israel, all of its policies. It's not that they care for the Arabs in the region or making their lives better? What have they done to advance the lives of Arabs, whether they're in Israel or in Syria? Nothing. They are an anti-Israel organization that compares Israel to Nazis, trying to interrupt the president. They are a phony left-wing organization. And again, there's only 10 of them, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. But it did make the news all over the world. Maybe that's exactly what they wanted. So maybe I shouldn't even be talking about them. But nevertheless, this is a fail. These pro-BDS anti-Israel haters, it's a fail on their part, trying to interrupt the president of the United States at the Republican Jewish Coalition. So we have elections, and then the next biggest story probably coming on Thursday will be the Bereshit spacecraft, Israel's Bereshit spacecraft, scheduled to arrive on the moon on Thursday. Israel would be the only the fourth country ever to send a vehicle, whether manned or unmanned, to the moon. So it's great we get to end this segment on a positive note, talking about something unbelievable. Israel, a tiny, tiny country here, surrounded by hostile neighbors, yet able to have the ingenuity to send a spacecraft to the moon, for crying out loud. I'm sure the people of Israel will be paying close attention this Thursday. I don't have the exact times when, please God, if everything goes according to plan, that takes place. So we're going to take a short break right now. Come back with Dan Diker. My name is Josh Hasten. This is Israel Uncensored on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com, talking elections 2019. Hope you're doing well as we get closer to the holiday of Pesach, Passover, next Friday night. The holiday, the wonderful holiday of our freedom begins, and you can feel it in the air here in Israel. You can feel the election fever, but you can also feel Passover fever. Take a short break, and then we'll come back with Dan Diker. Thanks so much for joining us here in Jerusalem. We'll be right back.
Have you ever wondered what the Israeli Arab political parties really think?
We can't be part of occupation, our people. We can't be part of the demolition of Palestinians' house in Israel, inside Israel. We can't be part in killing our nation.
Tune in for an exclusive interview with Matanas Shahadneh, the new leader of the Balad Party. For the full interview, check out Inside Israel Today with Gil Hoffman on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com.
And we are back. Josh Hasten here, Israel Uncensored on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com. Thanks so much for joining us. The Israelis are going to the polls. I think 6.3 million Israelis, if I'm not mistaken, registered voters heading to the polls, and in just a few hours we will know who the next prime minister of the state of Israel is. It remains to be seen, but we certainly will know which party received the most votes, because this is an election for parties, not for specific individuals. Here at the 21st Israeli Knesset, joining us to discuss elections here in Israel, Dan Diker, our good friend of the show and research fellow at the Jerusalem Center of Public Affairs. Dan, welcome back to the show.
Good to be back. Good to be back on the landofisrael.com, Josh.
So when the initial polls come in, I believe it's 10 o'clock p.m. when the exit polls come out here just in a few hours. I mean, what is your prediction? What can you expect? What do you think is going to happen? I guess maybe based on polls that were taken in recent days, or just a gut feeling as to what the polls will show.
Well, Josh, the most outstanding trend that we've seen in the past weeks, which pollsters and analysts and even politicians from the Likud and the opposing Kahol Levan, or the blue-white party, are when you look at the numbers, you say the Likud has a very significant advantage on being able to form a coalition. And as you point out in the introduction, that's the key to parliamentary elections, proportional representation in Israel. Which leading party will get the tap on the shoulder from the president based on the recommendations that the other parties give to the president? As it looks now, the Likud is leading the opposing blue and white party by a very broad margin, somewhere like 66 mandates for the Likud, as expected, as opposed to the blue and white party, which is polling, including the Arab-Israeli parties, at 53 to 55. Without the Arab-Israeli parties, and no Arab-Israeli party has actually been in a coalition with either left-wing or centrist or right-wing coalitions, it would be 43 to 45. So there's a big 20 mandate spread in favor of the Likud. And it's a very important point here because I think it has led many analysts to say that the Likud has a distinct advantage going into these hours of voting today.
And just to explain this to the listeners, this has happened before in Israel's history. I think it was 8 years ago or so, when actually the Kulanu party of Tzipi Livni got one more seat in the election vote. In other words, her party, I think, was slated at 30 seats, while Likud at 29. I think that was the case. Nevertheless, because the right wing or the right of center had more support, therefore, the president decided to allow Prime Minister Netanyahu to try. He gave him the first shot at forming a government, even though he had one less seat. I mean, can you just explain that to the listeners? You go into an election, people vote, one party has more votes than the other, yet they are not given the opportunity to form a government. Can you explain that concept?
Just to take a quick step back, the party that she was the head of at that time was not called Kulanu, it was called the Zionist Union.
Zionist Union, sorry about that. Kulanu was a party in this election. Right, I apologize, that's Moshe Kachlon's party.
That's right, by former Likudnik Moshe Kachlon, who may in the end return to the Likud the way his party is stumbling along at 5 or 6 mandates at this time. So what are we talking about now regarding this particular?
So Livni finished with one vote ahead. Her party finished with one vote ahead in the Knesset. Netanyahu got the tap. I mean, how is that possible? And you would think you win the election, you have the most votes, your party goes and has the opportunity to form a government, but that's not necessarily the case.
Well, it's only the case if the other parties who pass what is called the minimum threshold of 3.25% of the electorate, which equals about 4 mandates, 4 seats in the 120-seat parliament, if they recommend Netanyahu, even if he were to get a mandate or 2 less, or vote or 2 less than the other leading party, the Blue and White Party, he would then get the opportunity to form the coalition. That's the way coalition politics work in Israel, and it's somewhat similar to the Italian system, but it's very proportional. It gives broad representation to the Israeli electorate, but it's a much less stable democratic system than, say, the U.S. system or even the British system, which is a hybrid system.
So right now, the reason, what Prime Minister Netanyahu has done over the last several days, he has gone to the media, something which he usually does not do, addressing the media, giving interviews one-on-one, encouraging people, telling them that, and actually this he's probably taking away votes from the right wing, telling them that
Get out and vote.
Because he's saying that he would like a significant majority over Benny Gantz's Blue and White Party, so that when the president of the state of Israel ultimately calls the shots, approaches the candidates and says, okay, what are we going to do here? Who are we going to call upon first to form a coalition? Netanyahu believes that, based on comments by Ruby Rivlin, the president, indicating that he was going to turn possibly to the largest party first, Netanyahu wants to ensure that he will be, in fact, that largest party, even if it hurts those on the right who may actually be his coalition partners.
Well, Netanyahu has been conducting in the last days what is being humorously called the Oi Gewalt strategy, otherwise known as the fire in the theater strategy, which means that to wake people up to the center right and to the right wing in the right wing constituencies. Netanyahu did the same thing. He pursued the same strategy back in 2015 when the polls looked at that time that the Likud would lose. And as a matter of fact, at that time, Josh, you and I were both in radio at that time working for what was called the Voice of Israel. We were together on actually the days before the election, on election night, and he's doing the same thing today in 2019 which is to really shake up the constituency and the electorate on the right side of the political map by saying we're going to lose. He's actually been saying publicly the right is going to lose ... unless you get out and vote. And so it's been called the Oigavolt disaster portend. And it worked for him 4 years ago, and he thinks it'll work for him this time as well.
And that being said, there are those who say it may actually backfire this time around because of the fact that 4 years ago, those parties, the smaller parties on the right, there was no doubt that they would pass the electoral threshold. But here you have so many parties and such a big group. The fear is now that perhaps Netanyahu may use that strategy and garner the most votes at the end of the day, just like 4 years ago when we went to Election Day and we thought that Bougie Herzog was going to win, and then Netanyahu, in fact, won. But some of these parties may not pass that electoral threshold, and therefore Netanyahu will have less parties to choose from when it comes to building a coalition. So do you think there's a serious possibility that this strategy this time around will backfire, or do you think he's taking the right path?
Josh, it's a balancing act. Netanyahu, even with the greatest of efforts, and he has been rifling through these interviews and all of the major network television, radio, and print interviews. He made what they call in Israel shoteh. He made drink or pull a mandate and a half, a total of 2 or 3 mandates, and that's not enough to really cause failure to reach the minimum threshold by some of these smaller parties. They're polling at 5 and 6 seats. The minimum threshold, let's remember, is 4 seats. The last poll we saw, there were 5 or 6 parties polling at 5 or 6 seats. So, he can pull a mandate from here and a mandate from there. It still won't send them into the garbage can, the electoral garbage can, if you will. We have to remind our listeners that if a particular political party fails to garner at least about 4 mandates, all of those mandates are lost. They go into the garbage. So that's what you were referring to in pointing out this high-risk strategy by Netanyahu. On the one hand, he wants to poll at 32, at 33 seats. According to the last polls, the blue and white leading opponent is polling at 30, at 31. So he wants to beat them out by 1, even by 1 or 2. And so therefore he's pulling from the smaller parties, but he wants to save the smaller parties. Most of them are on the right, by the way, because those would be the parties that would recommend him. And I believe that strategy actually is going to work, because the most important thing for Netanyahu is at least to tie the blue and white party in terms of total mandates. Let's remember that the blue and white party is a combination of 3 different parties. Telem, which is former Likud defense minister Moshe Bogi Ya'alon's party, which was not polling above the threshold. It was not. And then the leading parties, which is this newcomer, former chief of staff Benny Gantz, who has been polling at 16, 15, 16, 14, and then the Yair Lapid's party, which is called There Is a Future, Yesh Atid, which is polling also at 12, 11, 12, 13. So it looks like all the indications are that Netanyahu will be the prime minister. He will most probably cobble together a coalition. It will not be simple, and it may not be determined if a couple of these parties do fall off the political map, as you suggested a couple of minutes ago, Josh. It could be a very close race in terms of coalition building, because it means that if 2 parties, for example, on the right, let's say Avigdor Lieberman's party, which has been teetering at the minimum threshold of 4, if they go south, and Kulanu, which is the socioeconomic party of Moshe Kachlon, former the finance minister, if that goes south, well, those are 8 mandates. Those would be 6 mandates or 6.5 mandates that would go into the garbage can, and that means 6 less or 6.5 less for the right means 6.5 more for the left. So then all of a sudden you have a much greater balancing, even in the argument about creating coalitions. So what it may do, Josh, is force against the will of both leading parties. It may force them to sit together in what's called the national unity government, even though both leaders, both Gantz and Netanyahu, have said they don't want to sit with each other.
That was going to be my next question. This looming, perhaps reality, if in fact that is the case and neither side can form a coalition, while they have said repeatedly, and even listening to the radio over the last several days leading up to the election, both have insisted, the blue and white says they will not sit in a Likud led by Netanyahu. Possibly they would sit in a Likud led by somebody else if the prime minister is in fact indicted down the road. And Netanyahu is also saying that he would not sit in a Gantz led coalition. So both of them leading up to the elections. I mean, everyone says a lot of things leading up to elections. So do you think it's just the fact that elections are coming up and they have to appease their constituents and therefore are saying they will not be willing to sit in a government, national unity government? Do you think it's just that, or do you think in fact they will stick to their words and not sit with each other?
It's a very complex question. Let me try to break it out into manageable, logical, soundbite type of messages for our audience. Number one, let me make just a slight correction to what you said. Netanyahu has been indicted, and he has been indicted conditional upon what's known in Israel as a hearing.
It's a hearing, correct.
Right, so it's a conditional indictment. According to Israeli law, prime ministers are allowed to lead under this situation. And it's an important point to make to our listeners because there's been a lot of misinformation about that. That's been political statements and posturing. But legally, Netanyahu is fully within his rights to continue to lead the country as a leader who's been accused but not convicted of various legal problems. He has 3 different files against him, and he's in the middle of defending himself on all of those. Now, Gantz has said, and so has Lapid, that they won't sit with Netanyahu, even though he has been accused, indicted, pending a hearing, which would take place sometime probably in the next 12 months. The whole process would take about 12 months. And yes, you're right. They have said, Gantz and Lapid and the Blue and White Party, that they would sit with the Likud if it were under someone else's leadership. Well, that creates an unprecedented situation where a political party, any political party would have to send packing their elected leader home and change. I mean, it's a virtually impossible situation. On the other hand, Netanyahu has also said that he will not sit. He said it is in the Hebrew press as recently as this past weekend. He will not sit with Gantz, but they may be forced to sit together. It makes the situation for Netanyahu much more governable, because if the two of them together would get 64, 65 seats, then they would invite one or two of the other sort of centrist smaller parties, leaving out the ideological right-wing parties, but not necessarily leaving out what was the surprise party of this election, and that is the Zehut, the Identity Party, which is basically Rand Paul with a yarmulke on his head. That is who Moshe Feiglin, a former Likudnik, hawkish Likudnik, and he's been a great proponent of the land of Israel for years and years, but he repackaged himself, and he may be the kingmaker in this next government with a forecasted 7 mandates. Complete surprise out of nowhere that emerged in the last few weeks.
Yeah, he actually was a guest on my show about a month and a half ago, and we actually had some audio problems, but if you can go back and listen to that interview to get a little bit of a taste of what Dan was just referring to in terms of Moshe Feiglin and his policies. Again, he's a big question mark, but at the end of the day, as you said, he might be a huge factor when it comes to building the coalition based on how many seats he gets and based on the situation, whether those seats are crucial towards forming the next government. So we are out of time here, unfortunately, on the program this week, but the next time we speak again on Monday of next week, will we have a coalition already? The elections will be over, Dan. We'll have the results. That's for sure in terms of the number of seats each party has gotten because of the voters. But how long does it take my last question, how long does it take to build a coalition?
Well, it can take weeks, Josh. It can take weeks and weeks and weeks, and the Israeli Basic Law makes it possible for it to take. It could take, and there's with extensions possible to take up to even 6 to 8 weeks in order to build that coalition. we have to wait and see who comes out ahead and how easy it is for that candidate to get the tap on the shoulder. Again, the final message is it looks like Netanyahu has a serious advantage in terms of his ability to build a coalition. He's already made informal deals with a number of parties, but we have to wait and see. Israel is a hyper-democracy, one of the most robust democracies in the world, and the beauty of Israel is that people from the far right and to the far left, they live with the results that the public, that the choices that the public has made, and they do it in peace and without any violent opposition, as you see in so many countries around the world. It's really a great reflection of the Jewish democracy that we have here in the land of Israel.
Dan Diker Research Fellow here at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. Thank you so much for your expert analysis, and happy voting day, and let's see what happens. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much. Well, we're going to get that grill going because we're all going to be barbecuing steak.
Oh, absolutely. It's a day off, a day not only to vote, but a very rare break here that it's not a Jewish holiday here in Israel when you actually get the day off. So we will know the results, the initial polls, the exit polls in just a few hours. That's going to do it. Keep it locked here on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com. This show and all the other programs, as the coalition is being built, as Dan said, it could take weeks. So don't miss a minute with all the wonderful coverage here provided at the Land of Israel Network. My name is Josh Hasten. Be in touch with me during the week. Josh at thelandofisrael.com is my email. On Facebook, it is Joshua Hasten, or my new page, Josh Israel Advocacy and Journalism, on Twitter at Josh Hasten. And between now and when we speak again next Monday, everyone out there in the wonderful world of ours, be safe. Shalom from Jerusalem. Elections